Hello and welcome to the open platform of Public TV of Armenia. Today I will discuss the current situation in Caucasus and the Middle East, United States foreign policy in the region and other related topics with Michael Rubin, resident scholar at American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
In your latest article on the National Interest website, you criticize U.S. Secretary of State Blinken for waiving the Section 907, which limits the arms sales to Azerbaijan, describing the step as cynical. Why?
Well, first of all, it came 2 days after the recognition of the Armenian Genocide, the long overdue recognition of the Armenian Genocide. And in all the meetings in the run-up to that, the secretary and his staff hadn't mentioned to the congressman that he was planning to do this. It's also a violation of US law. The waiver depends upon certifying a few issues. Number one is that Azerbaijan is committed to diplomacy, but Ilham Aliyev has already said that he's no longer interested in diplomacy. He achieved what he wanted militarily. And the second is certifying that Azerbaijan remains a partner for counterterrorism. But how can you be a partner for counterterrorism if you're willing to bring in Syrian mercenaries to do your fighting, many of whom had previously worked for the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda affiliates? And that's an indication of just how unserious Secretary Blinken was and the ramifications of this at a time when Azerbaijan holds more than 200 Armenian prisoners of war. It suggests far from allowing and facilitating new diplomacy, what it suggests is that Azerbaijan can literally get away with murder. And so this is a very, very dangerous precedent for the future.
Many representatives, senators, and public figures in the United States call the president and the administration to put pressure on Azerbaijan for the release of remaining prisoners of war. In another article, you draw parallels between Ilham Aliyev and Saddam Hussein, saying that both refused to release the prisoners of war and captives after the war ended. Also, you mentioned the so-called trophy park in Baku. What do you think? Why is the administration so hesitant to blame the war crimes and keeping the hostages by Azerbaijan?
Well, first of all, let me say that when I worked in the US Defense Department in the Pentagon, I was the Iraq desk officer who took the call when the Kuwaiti prisoners of war that had been held since 1991 were all found in a mass grave. I take this issue very, very seriously. We can't simply assume that prisoners of war are going to have their health and human rights respected. We saw this with Saddam Hussein, and unfortunately, I'm worried that we could see this again with Ilham Aliyev, who increasingly seems simply detached from reality. When it comes to the trophy park, this is incredibly poor taste. This is something which Saddam Hussein did back during the Iran-Iraq war. And when I looked at the Azeri trolls trying to justify the action, they had to go all the way back to 1918 in order to justify the action when the United States, for example, had made a pyramid out of the helmets of German fighters. But the world has evolved a lot in the last 100 years. It's a shame that Azerbaijan has not. And so ultimately, this just seems to be a huge issue. And the fact that Azerbaijan is violating the agreements and the ceasefire so sharply, so early, it's just a test to the civilized world. It's a test to the United States. It's a test to France, and they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it.
Mr. Rubin, what do you think? Is it possible, and how far is it possible, that an investigation starts on the issue of how Azerbaijan uses the United States assistance and in reality US taxpayers' money to buy weapons and use them against the civilian population in NagornoKarabakh war? What must be done for that?
It is realistic, but it's going to take concerted diplomatic and congressional pressure. Look, on March 26, 2020, Stephen Begun, who at the time was the Deputy Secretary of the Deputy Secretary of State, had given Azerbaijan the waiver on Section 907 because he certified that Azerbaijan was committed to diplomacy. Well, 6 months later, we have actually less than 6 months later, we have this surprise attack from Azerbaijan onto Nagorno-Karabakh, onto Artsakh, and so forth. there's two possibilities here. Either the United States knew about it in advance, but didn't do anything, or more likely it was an intelligence failure. Either one is worthy of congressional investigation, given Congress's role in oversight. And so this should be a consistent demand of Senator Menendez. It should be a consistent demand of the Armenian foreign minister and the Armenian ambassador, because this represents an intelligence failure as great as the intelligence failure that led up to the 2003 Iraq war.
Coming to the Turkey and the Armenian genocide recognition, US President recognized the 1915 events as genocide. Reactions from Turkey followed immediately. What do you expect, and what do you think we can expect from Turkey and Erdogan?
Well, first of all, Turkey is a schoolyard bully, and they bluster, but if you stand up to them, they push back. That's what frustrates me, that we don't stand up more to them, and that France and the Western world don't as well, NATO as well. My biggest fear isn't with regard to Turkey and Yerevan. My biggest fear right now is with regard to Armenian cultural property inside Turkey. We've already seen Turkey reconvert the Hagia Sophia into a mosque and really suffer no consequences for it. And given Recep Tayyip Erdogan's racism, given his elimination and genocidal rhetoric towards Armenia and Armenians, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him try to target some of the Armenian property inside Turkey today. With regard to Yerevan, look, Yerevan, one thing which isn't understood in the United States is that the war in Artsakh started on the 100th anniversary of the Ottoman invasion of independent Armenia in 1920. That date isn't a coincidence. It suggests that what Erdogan wanted to do was continue the genocide. And the fact that we see both Erdogan and especially Aliyev, the dictator in Azerbaijan, talk about Yerevan as historical Azeri territory, that should be seen in the same way that Saddam Hussein once talked about Kuwait as historical Iraqi territory. The fact of the matter is that, again, Aliyev is becoming a new Saddam Hussein and Erdogan is his enabler. The world, we have to be proactive, not reactive.
What further processes can be started and can be expected inside the United States regarding the Armenian genocide recognition?
Well, first of all, the Armenian genocide recognition is, historical justice, and it's reality. And it's long past time we recognize it. And it's important we recognize it again, because there are some in Azerbaijan and Turkey who would like the genocide to continue. But beyond that, the reason why, as a non-Armenian strategy analyst, that I was so glad that this passed is it finally cleared the slate so that the United States and Armenia could advance their relationship in other ways, which are long overdue and for which have been neglected because the Armenian genocide resolution has been the top priority. Once Armenia's elections are through, I'd like to see a much greater dialogue with regard to the United States and what assistance we can provide with counter-drone technology. I'd like to see how we can cement our relationship with Armenia more. And what's traditionally been a liability from the standpoint of Washington has been Armenia's close relationship with Russia. But why does this have to be a liability? After all, the Armenian diaspora is huge, not only in the United States and in Iran, but in Russia and the United Kingdom as well. So Armenia really can take this liability of the Russian and Iranian relationship, turn it into a strategic asset and become the center point for diplomacy, not only about the South Caucasus, but much broader, given the disputes and given the fact that Armenia is a natural meeting place. This is what I'd like to see our relationship develop into.
Thank you for touching this topic. How would you evaluate Turkey and especially Erdogan as an US and NATO ally, and what to expect from the meeting between President Biden and Erdogan in June?
Well, first of all, Turkey is to the 21st century what Saudi Arabia was to the late 20th century, which is an engine for Islamic extremism. What we need to stop doing with regard to Erdogan, despite his presence in NATO, is believing that we are dealing with Turkey of 25 years ago rather than Turkey of today. The Turkey of today is the Turkey that will work with Islamic State mercenaries and transfer them to Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as to Libya and Somalia and elsewhere. So we need to recognize that just because the United States has a military base in Incirlik, that base shouldn't be a get out of jail free card. It shouldn't mean that Turkey isn't accountable for its actions. Just because Turkey contributes troops to NATO doesn't mean that we should give Turkey a free pass on terror sponsorship. Ultimately, we've got to deal with Turkey as it is rather than Turkey as we wish it to be. As per President Biden's forthcoming sidebar meeting with President Erdogan, Erdogan under George W. Bush, under Barack Obama, and under Donald Trump really had a way to fool US presidents, to tell them what they wanted to hear, to give them a different sense of him and Turkey than what they should have been seeing through reality. I do think that that President Joe Biden is going to be immune to this simply because he's so experienced, both as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and then as vice president of the United States. He's going to recognize Erdogan for what he is.
In one of your articles, you didn't rule out the perspective of another war in Caucasus. Why do you think so?
The reason why I wrote that was the November 10th ceasefire agreement was a very open-ended agreement with much that's left to be negotiated. What concerned me was this call for routes, not a single route, but routes through southern Armenia. And what I worry about is how Turkey might try to exploit these routes. Turkey made no secret of the fact that they saw them as a way to expand Turkish influence through not just to Azerbaijan, but through all of Central Asia. They see Armenia as an impediment to that. I spend a lot of time in northeastern Syria, and in northeastern Syria, Turkey used the excuse of needing a buffer zone in order to basically bring its troops in and conduct ethnic cleansing. What I worry about, given my experience in Syria, given that precedent, is the open-endedness of the November 10th agreement and what that would mean if Turkey is given any sorts of rights of transit over these routes, or if Turkey even creates a false flag operation in which a sniper kills a Turkish truck driver and Turkey uses that as an excuse to simply cut Armenia in half. Perhaps Russia could act as an impediment to that. But at the very least, we need to recognize that Turkey doesn't want peace, that Turkey's looking for an excuse to justify further action and aggression.
Another big factor in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Israel. What do you think, what role Israel did play in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
It was a shameful role. And the fact of the matter is, Israel provided the drone technology that enabled Azerbaijan to win this conflict, at least in the short term. And it was, in the past, Israel figured that they had to work with Azerbaijan simply because it was sort of a fuel for military technology sort of agreement. But after the Abraham Accords, they don't need to do that. They can work with Abu Dhabi. They don't need to make the moral compromises, which they have been making in the past. The United Arab Emirates, of course, isn't a dictatorship, but at the same time, it isn't a democracy, but at the same time, it doesn't have the aggression and the racism which Ilham Aliyev's regime in Azerbaijan does. So I also think from a strategic standpoint, Israel's setting a precedent which undercuts its own interests. There was a legitimate dispute with regard to Nagorno-Karabakh and perhaps a security dispute with regard to some of the seven neighboring districts. And it was understood that there would be a peace for security plan. This was something which had been negotiated and under the Minsk group. And it was understood that there would even be peacekeepers brought in, probably from Scandinavian countries, not from any of the co-chairs or the neighboring states. Now, when it comes to Israel and its territorial dispute with the Palestinians in the West Bank, what Israel has done by simply siding completely with Azerbaijan is creating a precedent in which security doesn't matter. Security in the face of aggressors don't matter. And that's something which, because of Israeli short-sightedness, will be used against Israel strategically as well.
Again, the question related to Israel, but in other viewpoint. What do you think, is it possible and how far is it possible that Tel Aviv follows the US president's example and steps and recognizes the Armenian genocide?
I actually think it's a matter of time until the Israeli government will do this. They've been held back by a number of practical considerations, but the lobby within Israel is strong and growing stronger. The evidence is strong and growing stronger that they're willing to accept. And therefore, I would suggest that within 5 years, Israel will catch up and do what's right.
Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for joining us and for your time.
Thank you so much.
This is Open Platform of Public TV of Armenia, and today I discussed the current situation in Caucasus and the Middle East, US foreign policy in the region, and other related topics with Michael Rubin, resident scholar at American Enterprise Institute. Thank you for watching us.